welcome to another episode of Decoding Phase Transitions, the DPT Podcast. And I'm your host, Hassanali, and here we decode career phases of brilliant minds in academia and beyond. Our guest today is Professor Ali Hassanali, whose life and career span continents, disciplines, and transformative ideas. He is a senior research scientist in the Condensed Matter and Statistical Physics section at the Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics, ICTP Trieste, Italy, and is also a faculty member of Statistical and Biological Physics at SISSA. Both these institutions are global centers of excellence. Having finished his schooling in Africa, Ali moved to the United States to study at the Purdue University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science, followed by a master's degree in mathematics. He went on to pursue a PhD in physical chemistry at the Ohio State University, diving deep into the molecular mysteries of water. His postdoctoral work then led him to Switzerland, where he worked with the renowned Professor Michele Parrinello at ETH Zürich and the University of Lugano, further exploring his expertise at the intersection of computation, physics, and chemistry. Today, his research focuses on water and quantum behaviors of biological systems, fundamental questions with far-reaching implications for chemistry, material science, and life itself. His work has earned major recognitions, including ERC Consolidator Grant, a Horizon 2020 grant with artificial photosynthesis, and an ERC Proof of Concept grant, a project using AI tools to design UV-absorbing, skin-safe sunscreens. But beyond the accolades, this episode uncovers the human story. We talk about his childhood in Africa, the role that his family and teachers played in shaping him, and his journey across continents from Africa to the United States and eventually to Europe. We discuss perseverance, identity, and emotional landscape of building a scientific life across borders. We'll hear about his love for mathematics, why he never had a plan B, the realities of his unique PhD journey, how he navigated being a small fish in a big pond, and the strategy behind his postdoctoral and academic transitions. Ali also shares his vision for African science, the future of AI in research, and his powerful advice for young scientists, especially those from Africa. So let's dive into this extraordinary journey. Here is Professor Ali Hassanali on the DPT Podcast. Welcome, Ali. Thank you for finding the time to be here. We are delighted to have you on our podcast today. So I would like to start on your journey, your scientific journey, and the path you have traveled to come at this point from Kenya, which is your birthplace. But before that, maybe we can start on a scientific journey a little bit at the beginning. You are interested in water, and the central part of your research for many years had been water. So, can you tell us what are the questions there? What we still do not know about water? Still boring water. So, why is it so interesting scientifically?
Firstly, thank you very much, Sananda, for this invitation and for having me here. So yes, so let's start getting into it immediately, which is why water. And I get this question a lot because people have been studying water for the last 2 centuries, 3 centuries. And so what more is there to know? Now, there are two aspects of it. One is that because water has always been thought to be the universal solvent of life as we know it, scientists from different disciplines have always, in some sense, tried to sensationalize water's sort of uniqueness. And there are actually people in my community, my own friends, who believe that maybe there's a bit of an overhype on the uniqueness of water. Why can't life or things, what makes water so special? Okay, so there's that aspect of it. But on, let's say, on the more serious scientific side, water is a liquid that has many anomalies. We know of the fact that ice floats on water. So there's this density maximum of water at 4 degrees Celsius. When you cool water into something called supercooled conditions, so this is where you expect, ice to form. In fact, you can cool water and keep it a liquid because ice takes a very long time to form. This is a kinetic process for it to happen. And something interesting happens, for example, in its compressibility. So the compressibility starts to increase. Compressibility is basically related to the intrinsic density fluctuations in the liquid. So in any liquid, thermal sort of fluctuations and energy will result in particles moving in the system. And this will result in them having variations in density. And these density fluctuations, what you expect is when I heat up a system, these density fluctuations increase. When you cool down, you expect these things to kind of get frozen. And that happens in water up to a certain temperature. And then something weird happens. It starts to increase again. So these are just two examples of interesting anomalies that exist just in bulk water. Let's take another example. You can take light water, so H2O and D2O. And so you change the isotope.
D2O here is the deuterium, which is the heavy
The heavy water.
hydrogen atom with one
Exactly.
proton, extra proton.
Exactly. So there's light water, heavy water. There's just a change in the isotope. And actually, life as we know it dies or does not exist in D2O. And this is a bit, it's curious. You just change the isotope, and what you're physically doing is you're changing something known as 0 point energy. So 0 point energy is this quanta of energy, h bar, so Planck's constant times a frequency. And in the classical world, you expect that these two things should not have any differences, H2O and D2O, but they have big differences. And why? What's fascinating about water is that there's some very interesting differences at the atomic molecular scale that then lead to very drastic emergent phenomena on a much larger level. And what's still not understood is how what's that link between these microscopic to the mesoscopic and larger scale. So that's just water in the bulk. Then there's lots of interesting puzzles on what happens at water near interfaces. There are people claiming now in the community over the last 10 to 15 years that if you take micro droplets, just create small droplets, you can speed up chemical reactions because these reactions are somehow enhanced at the interface between the water droplet and the air.
Okay. Do you make these micro droplets under some spatial condition in the laboratory?
So they do it in several ways. You basically use something called an electrospray. So you fly these jets of water, and then you bombard them, and they break up into small droplets, and people then monitor reactions in these small droplets, and they observe that there's some chemical reactions that appear to be more enhanced. And the argument is that something special goes on at the interface. But there's a lot of debate and argument about what the source of it is. Is it actually water, or is it other stuff, impurities in the water that are playing a role? So water has always been a system that has tended to attract people because of interesting phenomena that emerge. And my experience personally has been every time you start to dig, or I have dug deeper into things, you keep learning new things. But I think this is nothing special about water.
Yeah.
You do this with anything. You think deeply and probe deeper into any problem, you will always discover new things. I think the nice thing about water is because there's been lots of people, communities, experimentalists, theoreticians working on it. This has been a nice playground for interdisciplinary sciences, which is what I've always been attracted to. So I like the synergy of the physics, the chemistry, the computer science, the engineering that of approaches of people who study water in different contexts. Yeah, that sort of I think I hope summarizes a bit the interesting questions and puzzles in the field still.
Yes, it is fascinating. And as I understand from you, that it's only the tip of the iceberg still.
Yes, pun intended, yes.
Yes, but there are like lots of other questions about perhaps hydrogen bonding and proton transfer, which
Yeah.
we might dive deep into later.
Yeah.
But let's go to your journey, your career journey. You are interested in interdisciplinary research now. You work at the intersection of many different fields.
Yeah.
But let's go back to your early childhood. And where did the first spark of science or the curiosity has generated? What was your path to find this career?
Okay. No, thanks for that question. So there are several answers or layers to that answer. One is, I was born in Tanzania, and then when I was 1 year old, my parents moved to Kenya, Nairobi, which is where I grew up for 16, 17 years. I'm a child of privilege. I'm an African child of privilege, I should say, from the beginning. My father was an academic. He was actually born in Zanzibar. He's an academic, but when he was in high school, he did very well in chemistry. And he had a teacher from England who saw something in him. So actually, the context is he came from a family of 15 children. He was in this high school. He was the only person that this guy saw something in him. And he said, you should apply for one of these Commonwealth fellowships to go to Australia. Okay. So he applied, he got it. And so he moved to Adelaide, Australia. He got his bachelor's and master's in chemistry there. Then another person thought, well, you should go for a PhD. So then he went to Nottingham for a PhD. So he was, I think, always naturally, he had a kind of a natural talent for science. And I think his experience living in Australia changed a lot for him in terms of his perspective and critical thinking. And so he brought to that a lot to the family. So our bookshelves had, all these popular science books on black holes and bio things on chemistry. So I never really read that stuff, but I saw it in the background. He used to order New Scientist and Scientific American.
Mhm.
So those used to be sitting around. My experience, I think that when you're exposed to something like that, it goes in one of two ways. Either you love it and you like it and you want to get, or you hate it and you don't want to do it and you want nothing. And for me and for us in our family, it went in the direction of, well, this is an interesting path. And so we were always brought up. I have two older sisters who didn't become scientists per se, but they became, one is a medical doctor, the other is a pharmacist. But we were all always encouraged in science and mathematics.
Can I ask you at this point, like,
Yeah.
how did your father transfer this enthusiasm for science to the children? Was it by just looking at his life, working and talking about science, or like I kind of guess that this is like
Yeah.
an osmosis process that you were saying, but was there any active part in it, like he actively took you to the museum or somewhere? So I was wondering, yes, whether there was some activity that you did as a family that also kind of act as a catalyst in this.
Not, I would say, not really. I don't think there was anything that. It's not like he was trying to do experiments with us. Like there was never anything like that. But I noticed two things as a child growing up in that kind of environment. Number one was he was traveling a lot. He was going all over the world, and I saw what that meant in terms of what he was coming back with and what he would. He wasn't a very talkative person, so but he would say a little bit about where he was and who he met and what the experience was about. And so that caught my attention. The second thing that caught my attention is our house always had visitors from scientists from all over the world. So And this is, people, these were all, because my father's a chemist, was entomologist, so people studying insects. And so all the year round, there would always be, his students or his visitors, and I would observe and see and listen to those interactions going on. And I thought it was less than the science part of it. It was more, this way of life is an interesting way to open up your horizons and your mind, which I did not see. This statement has to be contrasted with what I saw around me in happening in my community, and what I saw at home appealed to me more, and so yeah, it was. Of course, there was when it came down to, we sort of did have a choice on. There was a bit of a bias in the family on, because where I was going, I went to a British school, and so you either had a choice of doing biology, if I remember correctly, engineering, math, sciences, or business. And 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 I say this, but I don't think I don't agree with this. But he had a ranking in his mind of engineering science at the top, then there was biology in the middle, and business was at the bottom. And and back in the time, typically the classes in the school where people went into engineering science had the most, I wouldn't say the best students, they were just harder working, more motivated. And so he always gently pushed us there. And then we, when it came to education, there was an influence. So because he had traveled, he had been to the U.S. many times, he had lots of U.S. collaborators, and he thought that I think could be useful for me in the future was some sort of hybrid of mathematics and computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what he encouraged. And he said, look, I think that's what you should do. And I sort of had a vague idea of what that was. And we can get into what my reflections are on whether that was a good or a bad choice. But there was a lot of input on that. There was a lot of friends that he knew who were able to guide me on university selection. And so him having those networks made a huge difference in the advice that he could give and how he could enable me. And then I think this is an important thing.
Yeah, we'll come back to this point.
Mhm.
How did you go across the continents to study in the US? But for some time, let's focus on your childhood. And because you grew up in Africa, what were the challenges or the opportunities there around you? Because this is an important point, I feel like, for the listeners to understand and know that your root was there in Africa, and then you made these big decisions and the transitions. We understood now that your father played a huge role in that. But also we are the product of our surroundings. So how that had shaped your life?
This is a great question. So yeah, the schooling system in Kenya was not okay. The public school system was not particularly strong, and my parents knew this. So we spent a couple of years in the public school system, but then we moved to private schools essentially. And so I went to a private school, Catholic school actually, for 8 years. But in some sense, I was never really good at school in the beginning. I was lazy. I didn't want to study. Didn't find it fun. And then I say this, that the public school not being good, but being able to go to a private school, but then with a support system at home was important.
Did you face any challenge with the gap of the levels of study there, or was it a smooth transition?
There was a challenge, but luckily I had, well, not only my older sisters, but my dad was very much involved in smoothing that gap. And so, I remember now, actually, I'm remembering now something that, so for example, he had these books from the US. There were three or four volumes on investigating school mathematics. And on each page, there was this problem it's called the think problem. And there's a think monkey. Okay. And, these were these really out of the box problems that you had to solve. And until the age of 13, starting from the age of 6, when I was, because of the transition, he used to give me homework every weekend, and also the whole summer. I had to do problems, and then he would grade it. He would check.
Apart from his career, he was also deeply invested in your studies, like all of the siblings.
Yeah, this was his main goal, and we'll come back to this, but his main goal was focusing on education. You've heard me talk a lot about my father, but I haven't mentioned my mother. And I have to be honest, that was something that I did not realize the value and what she did, because earlier on in my life, because I was focused on the academic type things, but I've realized that she had an enormous role had a much higher emotional intelligence. She was very good at networking, making friends, socializing. She was the person who really organized, and I didn't realize that I was exposed to that at a young age, and I was learning it from her. I did not learn that from my father. He taught me a lot of the other things, and this ended up being critical in my career as a scientist.
Yeah, I assume also where you ended up with that.
Yeah, we do. Exactly.
It's such a vibrant place with lots of different background, people, culture, and this kind of particularly skills of interacting with people with ease would help you a lot.
Yes, and so and it helped me with my science too. So I wanted to mention that because I did mention it before, but it is a very important part of the forming and my background.
She kept the day-to-day business going for you to even not notice that it is impacting you.
It's absolutely, and of course, she was not going to make a big deal about it. These are the contrast between the hard skills and the quote unquote soft skills.
Yes.
That the soft skills don't get highlighted as, oh yeah, that's I helped you with the soft skill. So they kind of go into the background. But I think they're absolutely important, and we can get into this point later, because I think it's actually a very important part, especially when you get later on in your career.
Yeah, we will come back to this point again, but let's now focus on your journey coming to the story that you had decided to move to the US for higher studies. You did your bachelor and master's there, right? And following a PhD. So you spent a lot of time there. And what did you face as challenges? Was there any cultural shock? Which are the initial struggles that you found yourself in from moving to Africa to the US to a new culture?
Okay, so initially, when I was 18, I mean, the excitement of moving to the United States was like, oh wow. I mean, and the image when you're growing up in Africa of the United States is Chicago, LA, New York, and so that's all I had in my mind, and I was ready to leave, and I wanted to leave, and I was really excited about it. I went to the middle of nowhere, which is in a small town called West Lafayette, Indiana. That's where Purdue University was, and that was a huge shock for me of how different the United States is from what I thought it was, and so much variation. So I was in the middle of basically cornfields. so a good place to study, basically.
No distractions at all.
No distractions from anything. And so this was a huge, let's say, perturbation. And then, I was in the Midwest, which was I was in a residence hall with basically young white American males, essentially, who had never left their state. And so here I was, this guy who's come from Africa, and there were a lot of interesting experiences with stereotypes, but I think because I had grown up in a family that had been exposed to a lot of cultural diversity, and most most of the things that I experienced, I never took it in a negative way. So I think people are. I honestly believe in general that people are just generally good deep down. That people sometimes deliver things in a bad way or in an ignorant way, but and so I sort of adapted to how people sort of treated me, I would say the biggest challenge I faced was probably after 9/11. So 9/11 happened in the United States 2001. I was a second year undergrad, and there was a huge lashback against Muslims, people who quote unquote look Muslim, anyone with a beard, Indian looking like people, Hispanic. So that was in a place like in the Midwest. It was tough because you really felt there were lots of incidences where you really felt you need to just get out of this space because. But
Was there any community help? Like, did you find any support system back then? Like, I can imagine as a single student with no family around.
yeah,
This could prove to be a real challenge. Like, apart
yeah,
from the studies, if
yeah,
somebody has to go through this kind of pressure,
yeah.
this is humongous.
Eh, so I had a kind of a philosophy that when I went there, the first thing I did is I didn't want to rely on a community. So because what happens, I saw it happen around me that when people are minorities in places that they go to, the first thing you try to do is to self-preserve and protect. And this is normal, and it provides a safe space. I tried to resist that, and I think maybe I was lucky, and so I managed to create a support system that involved different elements of community.
Yeah, I was
Local
not
American
mentioning
community.
like
Yeah,
really that
yeah,
community as a, but like a community of friends or some
yeah.
support system. Like, mhm.
Yeah. So definitely that was important, and I certainly managed to develop it, and in some ways it was a bit by chance
Okay.
encounters with people in class,
Yes.
with people in the residence halls that I was living with, and so yes, the community, building a community and a network that can enable you and help you and support you and is absolutely important, and so that definitely helped. And but okay, 9/11 went through, but somehow there was also good support from the university system, and you really felt like at the time that the community wanted to help all the international students, and so yeah, it was okay. I mean,
Yeah. I am glad to know that you had overcome that big challenge and you
right,
survived and you are thriving. And but a little bit, we'll go back to your journey. I think we missed one important
mm,
point, that for our listeners who are from Africa right now, want to make this transition from Africa to the US. Um, how can your experience help them? Like, what kind of mindset they should have, what kind of strategies they should build, so
yeah,
that they find, according to their potential, the best places in the world, basically anywhere they
right.
can, if they are willing to move from across the continents. What advice would you like to give them?
I think okay. So number one, and I think you mentioned this at the last part of your thing, that is that yeah, it's not just targeted to the US, but in general, you want to go to Europe, you want to go to China, you want to wherever you want to go. I think developing skills, broad sets of skills at an earlier point in your life is is very, very important. So, when I was in high school, I mean, besides the academic side of things, I was heavily, heavily involved in lots of extracurricular things, public speaking, debate club, Model United Nations, different sporting things, Rotary Club, all these types of these things, which are strategically, they show several things. The one, your motivation, your drive, your interest in things outside of just being able to do work, being able to do academic work. And I think this is important. The other thing that's important is, you know, being able to rely on identify mentors, people who can guide you and advise you on, what are the things that you want to do, like where do you see yourself. So, and it's more about not having the answer, but you need to have people who can ask you those questions, right? Like, where do you see yourself 20 years from now? What do you want to be doing? What? And you may not know the answer. Maybe and probably most people don't, but you need to be able to be asked that question to start to figure your thinking about what path you, if your goal is X, then okay, I need to do these things. So having mentors, I was lucky to have it naturally in my house, but that doesn't mean that there are not other mentors who can, or not a part of family.
Yeah,
So
and also I would like
uh,
to mention at this point that during your time there was maybe the social media didn't exist, and nowadays internet has gone
yeah,
to such a strength that you can basically cold email people, try
exactly.
to connect with them in LinkedIn or the university sites. Like, you have several ways to approach these people and get feedback. Even if you do not get response in your first 10 attempts, I would think that you should keep trying, approach to people, and also tell what is your outlook and a little bit about yourself. Tell about your
Yes,
outlook, what you think, where you want to see yourself, what is
yes,
your view about think a little bit, do a little bit of homework on
yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
and then approach people. If you just blindly ask, there might be not much that you can achieve.
And I mean, just to your point, like very practically, there are huge networks of African scientists or African people from in the diaspora in the US who have networks who you know can easily advise or can be used as a resource to help people point them in. And so I think a lot of it is also then is knowing a sort of a starting the self critique process earlier to understand what it is that, what are your goals, what are your ambitions in life, and what do you want to achieve. And then if you know what those are, then you can take steps to implement. But yeah, you need to have, that's an important process to so career counseling, for example. In Africa, it's, if you go to the public schools, at least, well, I don't know, I've not been back now. I haven't lived for 25 years, but this was unheard of. But I'm sure things like, you know, now with the internet, with social media, this is stuff that I'm sure is fully available
Yeah,
online.
just ask ChatGPT
Yeah,
perhaps.
that's that.
If you have
Yeah,
nothing, if you have nothing,
yeah,
just ask
yeah,
ChatGPT to generate some questions and answer
sure.
them for yourselves
Yeah,
to figure out
yes,
where do you stand. That's maybe the first rough direction that you can take
abs-
towards it.
absolutely. And I mean, any other advice for young African people? I think what I see is really missing, a huge gap. Now that I've lived in, I've experienced the American system, the European system, the African system, is the at a very young age, unfortunately, the culture in the schooling system of critical thinking is still missing, and this is not going to be solved by doing harder mathematics. And how you do that, and maybe there's an opportunity with the AI revolution, because this democratizes, critical thinking is, there's a I think there's a pretty more or less well established pattern of things you have to do. So an AI bot, some can learn this pretty easily, so maybe there's an opportunity there for involving this into people's day to day lives, and in developing that skill. Because if that doesn't develop earlier on, I think there are many things that become harder to do later on.
I think also we are talking about a lot of decision making things in our podcast. So the decisions come from this critical thinking. It's not random things that other people are interested in, that you just jump on the bandwagon and just
Yeah.
go towards it. It's a lot of your self analysis, and
Yeah.
these analysis come from critical thinking. You have to spend some time on
Yes.
these questions
Yes.
about your life. You may not want to give those to ChatGPT, but
Sure.
but
Yeah.
to develop those for yourself is pretty important. So critical thinking and decision making, I think, come side by side if you want to achieve great things in
Yeah.
life and design your life in a way.
To me, I think another thing advice I would give for young African people who are interested in, in generally in the career choices and stuff, but I think there's a real need so we should not lose out on curiosity driven things. And unfortunately, society, everywhere in the world has evolved to that has taken the back burner. And I think it's important to try to bring that spark again on, if you're curious about something, do it.
Yeah.
And don't over worry about, how much money am I going to make? Or will I earn a lot of money? Or money is important. Money is an enabling factor. It allows you to be comfortable, allows you to do things, but it should be a tool, in my in my opinion, rather than an end goal of doing things. Unless you just want to make a lot of money to become rich, fine. That's also okay. But somehow the value in curiosity driven discovery, I think, needs to be re-emphasized, especially in the African context.
Yeah, I think not only in African context, it's true perhaps throughout the world that curiosity driven pursuits are most useful, and obviously it's central to the academic journey or the journey you have taken. So your curiosity has led you to the US. You did bachelor's of science there and master of science in mathematics from Purdue University. How did you choose mathematics? Because as I understand now, still you haven't told us that you were particularly interested in mathematics. So where did mathematics come from?
Yeah, that's a great. So this is an interesting. So I did my high school was in a British school where I did A levels. So this is the O levels and the A levels. This is the old school A levels was something called GCE, so General Cambridge Examination. So it was an exam from Cambridge, and then that allowed you to typically go to British universities. And I had an outstanding teacher in my third year of high school, and this British school was an Indian guy. He was just incredible. I was sort of average in math, and I was not so excited about it before him. And he flipped the switch. I fell in love with it, and I started doing really well in it. His name is Mr. Vinod Singh. I tried to look him up, but I've not been able to find him. But if he ever sees this, a big shout out to him. And then he is the one who encouraged me to start. You could, in A levels, you could do pure mathematics. So, there was physics, chemistry, biology, pure mathematics. And then you could do something called further mathematics. So this is another module specializing in mechanics and more advanced things. So I started, there were two or three of us who started taking tutorial courses with him. And, I remember this because, this was the last 2 years of high school. There were three of us at lunchtime while everyone else was having a lot of fun. We had an hour and 20 minutes. 20 minutes was for lunch. And then the 1 hour was, doing this further mathematics. And then, of course, at 2 o'clock, you'd have to start again in your regular. So this for me was a huge turning point. He encouraged me to take part in something called it was the Science Congress. So we had the Science Congress, and I took part in this thing on sound pollution. Okay, and there was I forget now the details, but looking at using some mathematical tools to do signal processing. So that was a turning point for me. And then through conversations with them and also with my father, I said, well, maybe you should. Mathematics could be a fun and interesting with maybe a computer science, a computational science element to it. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply to math programs. And so this worked out at Purdue. They had a semi-decent math program, and it was supposed to be math, and this is now computer science from now more than 15 years ago. So it was still old school programs. I had never programmed in my life.
Did you have a computer at home? I suppose yes.
Yeah, my father bought a computer, one of these old school, big floppy disk. So the only thing I could do on that computer was to play Carmen San Diego. Carmen San Diego was most of the people listening to this podcast maybe don't remember it, but it was an old game. It was super slow, but it got me a first feeling of this world. And then I went into a math computer science program where, there were all American kids in that program who had all programmed their whole high school. And so I went to this class, and they were teaching Java, introduction to Java programming. And I had no clue. I never touched a programming language. And so this was huge perturbation, right? Because there's, and this is the story of life in some sense, and it never stops. You come from being the big fish in the small pond.
Sorry.
And then you become a small fish in a very big pond. And this happens continuously wherever you go. And it's how you respond to those things. And it is okay to feel like I'm all of a sudden this really small fish in a very big pond with people who are much better than me. Yeah, well, welcome to life. And so that was very hard. But so on one side, I struggled a lot. I remember I was every night on the computer in the lab. I never had a laptop at the time. So in the lab, trying to work with the TA, learning, and so it was a huge learning curve.
Ali, I would like to interrupt you here because I think you touched upon a very good point that this small fish in a big pond is kind of never goes away, that feeling, right? And it's as you said, it's story of life. Can you tell the young people also about this being the constant feeling, how they can still make progress and look at the future, and this feeling of initial nervousness, how to deal with it in the bigger scheme of things. I totally agree with you that it's always the thing, but this is also the thing that one should not be afraid of. It's the maybe on that contrary, I think that's the test of things. Like if you are not having that feeling, maybe you are in the wrong pond.
I fully agree. I think this is not obvious when you're going through it. My experience has been that when you're the small fish in the big pond, you become the best. You're the top of the line, and you kind of stop being challenged and learning, and you plateau because you're
a small fish in a small pond.
The big fish in the small pond.
Sorry. Yes.
And when you move into the place where you start to feel like the small fish in the big pond, part of it, and actually most of it, is that you're now seeing people, a lot of other people who also know a lot of stuff. And it's not that they know more than you. They know a lot of other things. And so you have two opportunities. One is you have a lot of things to learn. And this is where collaborations and networks and you realize that it's not about the individual and your own, but a key part of your success is going to be, interacting with other people, and what you learn from them is important. And the other side of it is when you feel that way, this is when the most interesting creative discovery can happen. So it's an opportunity, and you have to go through a process of letting go of your fears of making mistakes, looking like an idiot, looking not smart. What does this person think of me? I'm not smarter than these other people. They're way smarter than I am. And those are okay feelings. And the fact is, you will often meet people in life who are going to be way smarter than you and who are going to get stuff much quicker than you. And that's okay, because you have a path. You have to believe that you have something that you're going to contribute to and going to make a difference and you're going to be that small fish in that big pond that's going to create a community. but it's not easy. And that feeling continues forever.
Yeah.
You manage to handle it and do this. I'm really bad at these new. So first time I'm using these AirPods, and now I know why I should just stick to like a wire thing because they keep falling off my ear.
Thank you for saying this, because I think coming from you, it gives a lot of courage to the young listeners, and they should not get fearful of these kind of feelings. It's perfectly okay. And people who have achieved the highest things in the world, they have also faced it. So, and maybe still facing it. So coming back again to our main topic of your career journey.
All right, so the
You were talking about hustling in the night to and the laboratories for this to learn computer code.
Yeah, that's right. So it was a huge struggle. I managed, but what happened there was I felt and I noticed that I had a better aptitude in mathematics at the time, and I was very excited by math. I really began to enjoy pure mathematics. So real analysis, proofs, functional analysis, so really stuff that I'd never been exposed to in the past. Then I started seeing it. So I placed more emphasis in my learning and interests there. I was still doing stuff in computer related things, but with less of an excitement. So it was kind of in the background. And then I did well in math as an undergrad. And then I said, oh, well, I want to continue this. I find this really cool. So I did a research project in one summer. It was in something called rings, fields, and it's abstract algebra. That was what it was. So I did this project with a guy called Uli Walter. Uli Walter is a German professor who was a professor in the math department at Purdue, and so he gave me. So math research was basically he used to give me reading material, and I would go and try to do proofs. And this was in my fourth year undergrad, and I was still enjoying it. I was struggling, but I was getting through it, and that was like, okay, well, I'd like to see if I can continue with this line. I managed to get. I applied for something called. So at Purdue, you could apply for something called these resident assistants. Resident assistants, you're hired in a residence hall, and you have like a floor of undergrads that you are supposed to kind of mentor, take care of, and as a function of that, they waiver your tuition and they pay for all your meals. And I applied for this thing, I got it, and so I said, okay, well, I'm going to use these 2 years to start my graduate studies in math at Purdue. So I started with the initial goal as well. I think I'm really interested in pursuing pure mathematics as a PhD. And I was interested in philosophy. So because as an undergrad, I did in the US, you have a major and a minor. So my major was mathematics and minor was in philosophy. And I got very excited by existential philosophy. And then I wanted to combine mathematics and symbolic logic. And then this is where the turning point happened. So in my master's, I remember being in the class. It was a class of about 7, 8 students, all graduate students. And that's where I realized where I was in mathematics compared to the other graduate students. I'd say most of the other graduates, there were a lot of Eastern European, Russian guys, essentially, whose minds worked in a different way in how they did proofs and functional analysis. And so what would take me 10 hours to do as a proof would take them 20 minutes. And so, I did one course, I did the second course. I was doing fine. I was getting A's and B's. But then after my first year, I got into the second year, I started to rethink things. I said, well, I still really enjoy doing it, but am I going to be able to fill that I see the others having? And it looked like after a conversation with myself, an honest conversation with myself, I basically came to the conclusion that this is not where I'm going to shine. I am not going to be able and it's not that I didn't try. I tried. I talked to several of the professors and they were like, Ali, you should continue. It's okay that it's taking you 10 hours. I wasn't so convinced. And then it was about that time I took a course in mathematical biology.
How
Ah,
did that happen?
ah, so the math department was beginning to try to interdisciplinarize and diversify. So, and they hired a new young faculty who was studying mathematical ecology. So, he used mathematics to study biological systems. So, I took this course with her, and it was essentially differential equations developed to study biological systems. And I was like, this is all happening simultaneously. And in some sense, it's a bit on one side, and I think this happens a lot, which is self-consistently. I discovered where my own strengths were, where they stop, or where the barrier to develop would be enormous, and I didn't want to do that. And at the same time, I started discovering a new area. And so
Like
one
the
was,
way how you said self consistently, that means it
yeah,
is an iteration. Like
yeah,
it's not like sudden one day you wake up and say, it's not for me. But
yeah,
it's a kind of iteration. You try to change your
right,
thinking slowly.
right,
Yeah.
right. And it's a combination of your own skills, the feedback you get, your interests, and how you then accept and come to terms with because it's very easy, right? I mean, and I fell through this too. When I felt like a failure. I promised myself, and everyone knew, oh, you're doing mathematics and you're going to become a PhD. Now you're quitting, right?
Mm.
You're quitting mathematics,
But
and
these
you're going,
languages are also, I feel, a little bit like in academia or wherever in
yeah,
our mind in the society. These languages are also sometimes do not help us to
sorry,
find when why leave, why quit, because it's also you are diverting your path, which is
sorry,
quite
yeah,
fine and which is a
yeah,
smart approach.
yeah,
If you are a mountaineer, if you are in a difficult terrain, you will not perhaps go, depending on the situation, whether you will not go to the recommended path. You try to
yes,
figure it out at the moment.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
I sense that this is also as a community perhaps our responsibility to change these languages a little bit, and the
yeah.
thought process around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree with you. And yeah, so basically, then there was another course that I was on computational biology again, and that was my first taste where I actually remember it was a course in bioinformatics, and I remember the exercise was using one of the things called BLAS, so to do sequence alignment. And I then remember seeing using dynamic programming, so recursive algorithms used to do the sequence alignment things. And there I started to see some very interesting connections between the math that I had learned, the computer science that I'd seen, and then into an interesting area of biology and chemistry that I'd never even thought I was never interested in it at all. And so this was a huge turning point for me.
And that became easy to you, like it was easy peasy for you at that time.
Yeah, at the time it was what I learned was that I think the background in math made it easier for me to go
Mm-hmm.
in in the different directions. I didn't have strong biases.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't I wasn't formed in chemistry or in physics or in the where it's really like some strict notions that there's an advantage there. But then, as we will come into, there were rather substantial, huge gaps that I had to fill quickly. But again, the math background helped in because of what I chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the second year of grad school, and still it was a huge turning point for me. And then I started thinking about PhD programs. I said, okay, I think this area of physics, biology, chemistry, this I find very interesting, and I want to do this, and I want to pursue this, and so started looking at graduate programs in the U.S.
Ali,
Which is
at this point,
yeah,
I would like to interrupt you to ask, was there any plan B? Or was it like looking at your father, you thought, yes, this is the
yeah,
path, and at least up to PhD, and then we'll think about
yeah. I, that was definitely a big part of it. But in some sense, it was also so actually there was no plan B, to be honest. And it was a function of my own laziness. In a sense, I was very happy being a lab rat. And I really did not want to invest what I saw all my friends around me doing, the time and the effort. They were doing internships in companies, in Motorola, in this. And I was like, nah, hey, this is not why I really am not interested in working in a company and doing the efforts. And I think part of it is because I just enjoyed in my training, my undergrads. I just like to sit in the library and in the in the coffee bars doing problems without a. This is your task. You have to solve a real problem. So, in some sense, my choice was I didn't want to work on real problems or real immediate problems with where you have to
Deadlines and time
deadlines and stuff.
pressure.
Yeah, real time. And so I wanted to be able to just sit and think about things. And of course, this was reinforced by what I saw that my father doing. And so I said, well, it looks like a pretty nice thing that I'd like to do. And so I never actually invested in a plan B.
Okay.
There was a plan A of different options within plan A. And it worked out. Yeah. So then I applied to grad schools. And
But for going there, like how
yeah,
is the choice made of grad school? Like I would think that in the US also there is like plenty of options to go to.
absolutely.
And how did you zero
How
down?
did yeah?
Uh,
So it's a. I applied to several different grad schools. I got into some of them, didn't get into some of them. So I think I applied to like 8 or 9, and it was I think 50-50. Some of the 50 that I didn't get into. Two of them were after an interview that didn't work out, and then basically it was I was looking for graduate programs that were really interdisciplinary. So I wanted to be in something where there were people, faculty in mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry, all in one umbrella. I mean, the thing at Ohio State just kind of, I wouldn't say it was my first choice, to be frank.
okay.
It was not my first choice. It just worked out. I went for the interview. I met some of the faculty, and actually, it was in the meeting of the faculty, and this is again completely random, where I met 2 people. I met a mix amongst others who I ended up then choosing to work with. One was an experimentalist. So my first PhD supervisor, Dongping Zhang, he had gotten his postdoc with Ahmed Zawel, who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for femtosecond spectroscopy, and he had just been hired a year ago, and his goal was to look at biological water. And this is what he wanted to find with his experiment. And he was trying to collaborate with Sherwin Singer, who was a theory guy, who was a specialist in ice. So Sherwin Singer was a stat mech person who did his postdoc with David Chandler from Berkeley,
Mhm.
and they were trying to do something together. And so I ended up talking to both of them, and so Sherwin was just himself beginning to learn how to do molecular dynamics on his own. So when you want to do molecular dynamics, you need a strong background in statistical mechanics, classical statistical mechanics, which I had never formally learned. And so I remember, so this was not at the interview. This was now after I accepted.
I see. Can I
Yeah.
then a little bit focus here on the interview process?
Okay.
And also another thing that I'm wondering now,
Mm.
many a times academia box us. Like you got a master's degree in mathematics, you are a mathematician. Yes, I understand you branched out a little bit and you found your love
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
biomath
Yes.
overlap.
Yes.
But the chemistry part of it was
Yeah.
missing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what happened in the interview? How did they choose you?
Yeah.
In no background in the chemistry, and could you please
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that
So
process?
that's a great question, and in fact, I think what they were interested in was initially in my math background, and they thought, okay, this guy's a mathematician. He's going to fit well with someone doing applied math. the fact that I did not continue in pure math and the fact that I was interested in mathematical biology, because they knew that, I think they understood that I was interested and that I could excel and do well in a more applied math type area. Okay. So that's what they thought. And they thought, okay, well, there's some interesting applied math people in the math department at Ohio State, and he might choose to work with them. It wasn't really evaluated on the chemistry part, but that came later. So then I got the offer, I accepted, and then the first year you take some courses and you start to rotate in labs. So when I was talking to Sherwin Singer, he was telling me about molecular dynamics. It was basically I remember this. There were several students that would come to talk to him who were interested broadly in doing this type of stuff, and they were all either physicists or chemists. They had exposure to molecules and stat mech, and but what I found is that this is where you realize that the differences are not so big when you start to look. And then he was talking about, I remember, periodic boundary conditions, which I had no idea what is periodic boundary conditions. And I remember when he was discussing it, I think I even remember making the statement. I started thinking about like interactions of functions and taking the limit, going to zero and going to infinity. Okay, because I was trying to understand, and this is maybe an interesting point to mention. But I would, and this I learned from my mother, which is so I was not shy about asking questions during the when he was there. I said, so is it like this taking a function? And I remember him looking at me and saying, yes, and that's essentially what it is. And so there were several of these types of things that came up in the interaction, and then after and the next day, he wrote me an email. He's like, I want to talk to you. He's like, I have funding to be an RA on something related to an NSF funded grant. And your goal is you need to be able to simulate a protein trapped in a silica nanochannel. I said, okay, I have no idea what a protein is. I don't know what silica is actually, but fine. And what was interesting is that, and this is where mentorship comes in, which is that he knew where my skills were at the time, and so he knew that I had, in my math computer science thing, compared to the other physicists and chemists in the group, I had actually played with codes. I'd been forced to go in, and so what he needed at the time was he needed someone because he needed to show this for the funding agencies, and so he needed to have someone who could go into a code, try to dig, make it work. And that's what I was able to do.
Oh, as a proof of concept.
Yeah, as a proof of concept. He needed to demonstrate that. Then he said, then we'll get into the details of the science after. And then it was, my PhD took 6 years. So then I had to take not only the courses in the program, but I had to take courses in the graduate school that I had missed in physics and chemistry. So stat mech, quantum mechanics, spectroscopy. And I did a lot of learning through action. We used to chat every day, me and Sherwin, on email, in person, on the blackboard. He would make me present things. He forced me to go back and read like all these classical papers in stat mech from David Chandler, all these different theories, which on one side, on the math side, okay, trivial. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? But but what I lacked was the intuition, right? Then what is physically behind the thing? So through a lot of back and forth together, that those gaps were slowly filled, and then with an ecosystem around me of physicists and chemists, I basically became a physical chemist, and in some sense, I'm depending on who I'm around, I'm seen as either a physicist or a chemist because the differences are not so big at the end of the day. But was it easy? No. There was a lot of learning, but I think the mathematics helped a lot. Like stat mech was at the end of the day just probability theory for me, right? So, and then quantum mechanics. Well, I'd taken lots of linear algebra, advanced linear algebra, so I'd seen it from a different point of view. I would say that, and I don't know if this was because of my lack of training in it, but if I'm more comfortable with classical statistical mechanics. So stat mech is where I'm, that's a type of thing where, and I teach it, and I'm comfortable teaching it. Quantum mechanics, it's less intuitive to me. So that was not easy, but in some sense, the gaps got filled. And so and the PhD in the US is long, so it was 6 long years that allowed me to grow and develop. And I really was lucky to have a PhD at the interface between the experiment and theory. And this is really, really important because it's a model I try to give all my younger collaborators now, and it changed the way how I do science.
Yeah.
And
Did you did you do any experiment by yourself?
no,
Okay.
uh,
But
so
there was experimental motivation for your theoretical or
there were direct, there were motivations, but not even just motivation, measurements that we were trying to reproduce, interpret, get the experimentalists to do them again. So we were really, it was
hand in hand collaboration and going together. Yeah, this is I think where most of the science today is heading, right? Most of the research and the fruitful research is where even in high energy you have to be dependent on the LHC experiments to get your theory tested. So even in the scheme of things, to subatomic particles everywhere, I guess experimentalists and theorists are going hand in hand, and that's the step forward. Yeah,
that is absolutely the way forward. And then I mean, basically after 6 years of a PhD, I then was looking for postdocs.
Do you think this phase of learning was the biggest challenge for you? Like where you were learning from basics, all the subjects like physics, chemistry. What was the biggest challenge in your PhD? And in the bigger scheme of things, what is the question? Why were you thinking of protein in a silicon? Like,
so basically, so there are two aspects of it. One is, I would say the biggest challenge was not necessarily learning the new material. So basically, Sherwin was a tough person, and but he wanted to push me into uncomfortable terrain, and so he made me teach the graduate class in statistical mechanics. This was now third year, and it was tough because so he said, well, you've now you know it, right? You spent your first 2 years, so here you go. And it was not easy because I remember being in the class, and it was people who've been formally trained who've learned stat mech in grad school somewhere, and there were times I did not have the answer. And that was
talking about uncomfortable feelings, right?
Yeah, it's a super. And how do you handle that, right? And how do you get out of those situations? And when you're young, you don't want to look like an idiot, and you don't want. And so, and I still remember those one or two times when there was this one kid who, in hindsight, he knew and understood the material better than I did. It was just naturally smart. He got it, and I remember his point and he wasn't just going to keep quiet. So he continued to push back, and I continued to push back, but I was wrong. And so those were moments when it was really, really uncomfortable. And what happens when you're uncomfortable? Then you go back and you start questioning everything. And that's you live and learn.
Yeah, this is also an important thing for, I guess, for listeners to understand that for you to admit that I was wrong is also a thing, because I think many places in the world, academia, the way of training is like, if you're doing a higher degree or in a hierarchically higher place, you cannot be wrong. And that's not true at all. It's also important to understand as an aspiring researcher or as a young academic.
In fact, this is a really, really core point, which is that if you want to aspire to be an outstanding researcher, you have to be ready to be wrong many times, because you will be, and that's how you make progress in developing ideas and progress. Yeah, that's not easy. But yeah, so now going back to the question about the project on the silica, essentially, this was a collaboration with, it was an NSF-funded grant with engineers, biomedical engineers. What they were interested in was developing devices that would flow blood through these nanochannels. And what they wanted to do was to detect certain proteins binding to the surface that were modified. So disease proteins. And so the engineers were doing what? There were people manufacturing the devices. There were people doing continuum modeling, hydrodynamics. And so our group with my supervisor was to do molecular scale modeling. So I was tasked with find a way to look at protein binding to silica and looking at the free energy, essentially. What is the free energy of binding protein albumin to silica? That was the goal. We didn't even get there. In fact, after the proof of concept, pretty picture, Sherwin said, okay, now that's done. Now let's start the real stuff from the beginning. And I basically spent 3.5, 4 years just developing a model, a potential to model water and ions near silica. So that on its own took, 3 years. And so we didn't actually get to the protein or the peptide. It was after I left for my postdoc, 2-3 years later, there's another student who then managed to put the not a protein, but a peptide near silica. So and this often happens in science. That right, you think you're doing this, but then you're going to do many other things. So
but this is also a critical step, right? As you said, like you went back to a simpler problem because simpler problem was not understood at that point.
Exactly.
Before aiming for the bigger problem, you have to also understand a simpler problem. And your work, I would say, that set the stepping stone for the later PhD student. So science is this way. It's slow, it's progressive, but it's incremental. So you have to take one step at a time, and each work has its importance in the big scheme of things in the long run.
Yes. Completely, yes. Yeah. So, and then the postdoc. Essentially, I was finishing up my PhD. I was trying to look for postdocs both in the US and in Europe.
Was postdoc also in the plan A for a long time?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It was basically, and it was a discussion. It was kind of, again, a self-consistent discussion with my supervisors because they said, Ali, okay, I think, and this is, I think, an important point that should be mentioned, which is they were pretty honest about what they thought the realistic path for me looked like. And they said, we think you have a very strong potential for building an academic career in research. I think you should, if you're interested, you should think about the route to a faculty position in the US. That was the original plan. And then it was, well, what do you need to do to go about that? Well, you've done a PhD in a strong group, but you're a big fish in a small pond now. Okay. You want to rocket launch your career, you need to go to a big name, a big person, big science to launch your career as a postdoc. Publish some very good papers with them, and then you'll be on the grid. So that was the strategy. And so we made a list about 10, 15 different people in the US, actually mostly in the US. I interviewed, I had a couple of offers in the US. And then there was one person that I was very interested in. I had been reading his papers since I was a young guy, which is Michele Parrinello. And I remember going to Sherwin's. It was in November 2009. And I said, Sherwin, Parrinello, I mean, what do you think? And he's like, well, Parrinello is outstanding. He's, top of the line. And he's like, well, I don't want to discourage you. You're welcome to write to him, but don't get disappointed if he doesn't respond to your emails. And then he said, like, I think there's no harm. Just try.
And for the listeners, I would like to mention here, Michele Parrinello he's the Parrinello molecular dynamics Parrinello. So it's none other than him. And he has, among his many credits and awards, he's the winner of Dirac Medal. So he's a big name in the field, right? And you're now trying to reach the really at the top. Yeah.
And I'd been reading his papers. Read all of his papers, and I said, this looks like fresh science. Why it looks very interesting. And then I remember seeing this, Via Giuseppe Buffi. This is where the road in ETH Switzerland, Lugano. This looks like a cool place. So I I wrote to him, and I sent him an email. It was a weekend, and actually, so this was after I had just had my son. So my son was a month old.
Okay.
And me and my wife had already went, because she's Canadian. We always thought, well, we'd want to be in North America, close to her family. So I didn't even tell her that I sent this this email that I'm just going to do it.
What did you write in that email? Do you remember?
Yeah, I basically, I was, I even have a draft of it somewhere. Dear Professor Parrinello, I'm very excited about your work. I'm a PhD student with Sherwin Singer, who he actually knew because Sherwin had done some work on ice using Parrinello. So he was one of the first people applying Parrinello techniques to ice. Okay. So he kind of knew of his work. They knew each other's work. And I said, look, I'm very interested in your these different things that you're doing, metadynamics, blah, 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 ab initio methods. And I've done work on water interfaces. I'd be interested in proteins. I'd be interested in bringing that kind of know-how to the thing. So I thought, okay, send this. Let's forget about it. Right?
What was the subject of this email?
Postdoctoral fellowship, or interest in postdoctoral fellowship.
Yeah, I think I'm asking all these details because I think these play a role, because he's a busy, important guy. If he's reading his email, that's the first thing
no. So it was that, and in the first line there was I'm finishing up my PhD with Sherwin Singer and Dongping Zhong, both of whom are, and I made reference to Dongping's femtosecond spectroscopy with Ahmed Zawel. So in the first line I said things that have a hope of catching attention.
Yeah.
And then so I remember sending this it was a Saturday afternoon, and then Sunday morning I wake up and there's a response in my mailbox from him, and he's like, hi Ali, thanks very much for your interest. And then he's like, I'm interested in talking to you. We could do Skype, but I find Skype awkward. So how about I fly you over?
Wow.
So, and I hadn't told anyone that I was sending this thing apart from Sherwin. And the first thing I did was I forwarded that email to him. He's like,
free trip to Switzerland.
and then he said, now you need to nail and get the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happened. And so I flew there.
How was the preparation look like before flying to Switzerland?
Yeah, so I have to say, 15 years ago, we spent much less time on polishing up presentations, like as much as we do now. I think the standards and aesthetics and tools and everything the quality of graphics have changed a lot
because of the also attention span of people.
Because of the attention span of people. So I remember. I have my old presentations where I look at them. It's like I look at them. They're like horrible. It's like loaded with text and no order. And but that was what was fine. It was okay.
That was also fine, but he's also not a tech guy. He is flying.
No.
He doesn't want to do Skype.
It is so. I practiced a couple of times, and then I flew there and I interviewed. It was daunting because it was a group of 30 people. There were 20 postdocs, all really brilliant, smart people, 10 PhD students. And I remember giving the seminar, and I remember specifically, he's now a friend and a colleague. He was finishing up his PhD, which is Michele Parrinello, who's an outstanding scientist in machine learning and things. And I remember his questions in particular, and then others, of course, and also Michele. I saw kind of how he, out of all my stuff, he got to the depths of the problems and the issues that I was avoiding.
Okay.
And this was nice to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically, yeah, I mean, then the rest is history. He basically made an offer immediately at the end of the thing. It's like, it'd be great if you came. And well, then I had to make a huge decision also with the family and about moving from the US and also what the future would look like because, moving out from the US, okay, doing a postdoc in Europe. And then if the goal is to get a faculty position in the US, then how easy is it going to be? Because once you leave, you're getting out of the networks. Okay. But then if you've got the pedigree of Parrinello and you do well, then maybe it's okay. What about the family? You're moving far away from family. How is that going to work? So, okay, we sort of rode the wave of the excitement of leaving and going to a new country and having a new experience, and so we did it. And then again, Parrinello's group was also very diverse. He had chemists, biologists, physicists, engineers, all moving around together, and there was no demarcation.
Okay.
And I think, and I've consistently seen that model of doing science, I believe, is the modern way to do it and the most successful way to do it and the most interesting one for me. I find the old school sharp demarcation just boring. And then I spent 3 years there.
Were you based in Lugano or were you based?
I was based in Lugano, and then there I sort of my work on water got even more specialized because then I learned to do ab initio things. And in fact, Michele wanted me to work on a problem that he was excited about, which he thought I could contribute to, which is he wanted to speed up protein folding using water order parameters or collective variable. I said, okay, you're an expert in water, make the protein fold faster. So he was interested in an idea. Okay. And I tried for 6 months.
Could you please, for our listeners, dive deep here on the question part? Like exactly how can protein unfold faster in water environment?
Yeah. So basically, okay. So basically, one of what has been a big problem and challenge in protein folding is that you have a sequence of amino acids in the protein, and it takes on a three-dimensional shape, which determines its function. And this happens in the condensed phase. It happens in water as an environment. Now, if you're trying to do a simulation to do this can be computationally expensive because it takes a very long time for the protein to fold because it's a very glassy free energy landscape. And so it can get trapped in metastable states. So people in the community like Parrinello and company had been thinking about ways to speed up sampling. And this is not only for protein folding, but crystal nucleation, chemical reactions, the same basic problem is everywhere. So he wanted to say, well, let's try to show that the slow degree of freedom can be perturbed, or you can turn the knob using the solvent. And so this is what he assigned to me as my first project. And I tried for 6 months. It didn't work. I tried so many different things. I tried different variables, energy, interaction energies, protein, polymer, and I actually wasn't working on a protein. I started with a simple Leonard-Jones polymer just to try to see if it would go anywhere, but it didn't. And I kept him in the loop on what was going on, but I knew and I realized that this was not going to work within the first month or two. But I had to show him why it didn't work and why he had to let it go. And at the same time, I needed to start my own stuff on the side. So, and that's what I did. I was reading his old papers that he had published with David Chandler on the ionization of water. And there's some things that I didn't quite agree with. So in the background, I was learning how to do things. We were learning how to do ab initio molecular dynamics and started these things on the side. After 6 months, I went into his office with the conclusion that, hey, it's time to drop this. And he realized it and he accepted it. But I also came onto the table with something else and something that I knew he would care about when he developed Parrinello. And this goes back to where we started at the beginning, where, everyone likes to put their hand in water somehow when they're developing theoretical models. And so I showed him some new results on the grad, and he got very excited. And then this opened up a whole line of, let's say, research, which made me go back to my courses in graph theory that I had taken in mathematics. So I started starting to think about and it's not a new idea. People had thought about using network theory in statistical physics in the study of liquids and then, but less so in chemistry. Now it's quite
Good question.
what tools do you have to probe the patterns non-locally, so in a collective way?
Mhm.
And because the standard tools in chemistry are to, and also in physics, is to localize your process. The chemical reaction is happening in one spot, but these things are highly collective and coordinate. So how do you interrogate that? What tools allow you to quantify and probe those things better? So that's what I started doing and learning, and then and in many ways, then this led to several papers, and then opened up lines of research, which he was completely happy and interested in it, and then I started. I actually remember this because I wanted to attend a meeting in Telluride in Colorado. This was I was in my last year of my postdoc, and this is where there were all the big names in the community. And I said, Michele, I'd really like to go, and they can give me a 15-minute spot there. And he said, let's go, do it. So I went, and that was kind of the beginning of me developing my networks with these communities. There, it was a contributor talk, and then I met lots of senior people who saw me speak. They saw my work. They saw my name. They saw the papers, and then that's a name that they remembered. And then 2 years later, I was invited to go to that Telluride meeting. And then the way it works is then you become part of that community.
Yep.
So the need of and the strategy of going out and talking about your work, even when it's half baked, and the content, of course, that has to be the content, that goes without saying. But putting yourself out there as a name, what are you going to do so that people can remember you and remember your ideas? And it's not enough to just walk in and think, well, I think my result is interesting. I'm just going to talk about my result. It doesn't work this way, unless you're Richard Feynman. Okay, or then you're in a different class, and it doesn't matter actually, because but for most of us, that's what you have to do. And so that opened up then my longer term connections and networks and communities that I'm now a part of and immersed in. And so at about that time, I was thinking about, well, now what's the next step, right? Because postdoc, now I'm faculty. So
That's a wonderful story of resilience in research. And also, you told us a lot of strategies about positioning yourself and make you look visible
yeah,
in these big conferences.
yeah,
But there is also this component of networking, right? Which is very, very important for a career in academia or beyond, wherever you go.
Right.
So, do you have any tips for young people or anybody in the field, maybe seasoned researchers, even also who are trying to build their network at this point, how to go about it? What are the right strategies, and also how they can prepare themselves before going to the meeting?
So there are several layers of it. One is, okay, so I think it is important one should not feel shy at getting one's name out there through colleagues and through people who know about your work. So, for example, there may be a conference taking place, and in a topic that's related to what you're doing, there's some very good people there. They just don't know about your work, but you happen to know someone. I've done this many times. When I was young, I write an email and say, hey, I still do it actually. All right. So look, we've published these recent works the last 2 years. I think it's actually potentially very interesting for your community, and you give actual reasons. So you make a case, a scientific case, not give me the visibility. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and that's okay to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
But the first step in this is to find out about the meetings or the
Yeah.
conferences in its initial phase when this is getting conceptualized or
Right.
in the organization stage. I think many people still struggle to know where these,
Yeah.
when.
So this is okay. I think this is a bit related to strategy and also way of how one does the science. And so my strategy and path was I wanted to build a field. I wanted to build an area. And this means that my strategy has been I'm quite one track minded. I have a core area, and then I have some fluctuations around. And when you have a strategy, and that's one mode. I mean, the other limiting modes, people like to work on many, many, many different things. Okay. And for me, I found it easier than when you trying to build an area and focused on one area, then the answer to your question comes sort of naturally. And this is something I don't want to generalize, but I think if you want to become an established researcher and an expert, focus and in developing a field is important.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes when you're young, it's very easy to be so on one side, you don't want to be also too specialized on one thing that you can't. But yeah, it's how do you strike that balance?
Yep.
And so when you're developing the field, you know, I started in graduate school. I started going to the Gordon Research Conference on Water and Liquids in New Hampshire from 2004. So I was every other year I was going to that. And I was the first 4 or 5 years just I was presenting posters. And I remember I was meeting all these senior colleagues of mine who were beginning to see me and blah 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 blah. And then it was after my postdoc, I got I didn't get an invited talk, but I got just to present after a poster session. And then the year after that, it became an invitation.
Yeah.
And so consistency with a community rather than pointing in many different directions, I think is a better strategy to facilitate this the identification of the conferences, because then people know you, they know what you work on, they know what you can bring in, and you get placed because of what you bring.
Yeah, this is a very important point. I think this is a great suggestion to for young people to keep it in mind from the beginning.
Yeah.
When the opportunities come, they can decide for themselves then
Yes.
where to go
Yes.
to focus on.
Yes.
Now, you had told us that we were at that point when you in your career journey where you were trying to find a permanent position.
Yeah.
Your primary focus was in the US.
Yeah.
But you ended up in
Yeah.
ICTP, Italy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about the sequence of things that led to it.
So in my actually my first year of my postdoc, when I started, I basically started applying for jobs right from the get-go. I had, in fact, and the way it worked was, and this is the advantage, or when you're in an ecosystem of 20 other postdocs, this is what naturally happens, which is there were like 3 or 4 guys who came to me and it's like, Ali, right from the beginning, I hadn't even started. They're like, start working on your faculty proposal. I say, what? Faculty plan? So, and it took me a year before that but the very fact that that triggered the thing. And so I was doing it. And so I was applying for jobs in the US. I had a couple of interviews, like 2 or 3. This was in my second and third year, but they didn't work out. So I went through the first and then the interview, but then
Can you also take us through this interview process for a faculty member? Because I think this is obviously an advanced stage, but as you said, like if they know the landscape, they can prepare beforehand, and that plays sometimes a huge role
Yeah,
in
yeah.
success factor.
Well, it's a bit different in different parts of the world. In the US, basically, it's you have to write your faculty research proposal and your teaching philosophy statement, and then you have to submit this for the call, and then they go through a screening process. And then if they're interested in you, then they call you. They have a Zoom interview, or a Zoom or Skype or whatever it was at the time, and then you have you have a 20-minute presentation, and then a half an hour present, then another half an hour of meeting the faculty and having they ask you a small subset of the faculty, and then they decide whether they should call you for a site visit. So out of the three that I interviewed, I had two online interviews. I didn't get called for a site. One I did, so I flew. I had the on-site interview. Thought it went well.
Sometimes they do also ask you to teach a class or
Sometimes they do. It depends on what the kind of focus of the institute is. So this one, I understood then after, and I got feedback. Is basically and this is something I learned through the process, was that I went in that interview without a real serious plan about getting my own money for research. I made some vague, superficial comments. Yeah, I'm going to apply to the NSF or DOE, which any person's going to say. But I did not convince them that these are specifically the things I have in mind. This is what I want to get it on. These are the partnerships with these groups in your university. So they had people who were much better, and so I think it was about that time when I was also starting to think about where I wanted to build my research career, because the default kind of pipeline was we're going to the US. So I just did it. And it was just at that time I started sort of asking myself how I want to contribute to African science. I'd never thought about it before, actually. I enjoyed my time away, and then it was really then it was a kind of a flip in the mind. I said, well, and I started talking to Michele about this, and I said, look, I want to contribute somehow to African science, and I know that if I go back to Africa now, that will be the end of my research career. And so I remember this. It was a Friday afternoon. We were having coffee together. I told him this, and then on Sunday evening, he sends me an email saying, I have an idea for you, for your future. He's like, I think you need to try to get a job at ICTP. And I was like, frankly, I'd never heard of ICTP before.
Okay.
I had no idea. No idea. I knew about a person called Abdul Salam, but I didn't know about, let's say, the science of the institute, really. So then he meets me on Monday morning. He's like, I am going to call my friend Erio Tosati. Okay, good. I don't know. I'm going to call and Sandro Scandalo. Okay. And so he calls them and says, yeah, I don't know what he said to them, but he's like, I think you should talk to this guy. And then I think a week later, I get an email from Sandro saying, hey, I even have the email. It's like, this looks like a rare event. Someone with a passion for science, but also development in African science. So I came for the interview. Well, it was I came to give a seminar here in Stasi rooms, and then it was not clear. I was looking for a permanent position, and there was no permanent openings at ICTP. That was the reality. And then what came out was that there was a possibility for a senior postdoc position. And I was a bit unsure about whether this was, do I really want to do this? Will I be independent? But there was something, this is not science, but a bit personal. I now had 2 kids under the age of 4, and I think I had made up my mind, at least, that I didn't want to bring up my kids in the United States for various different reasons, and so that was the constant constraint. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to adapt around those constraints. But I started the senior postdoc, and I immediately was applying for positions. And I said, because I knew that in order for me to have a negotiating power and leverage here, I needed to get offers. And so
And
that's
Ali, did you ever stop applying? Like, as you said, like from your second year of postdoc, you were applying already and you had
yeah,
calls.
yeah,
Did you ever stop because these transitions were happening in your mind that
yeah,
my constraints are getting built because of
yeah.
my family
No,
conditions?
I, I, so this is this is an important thing. Is so there are 2 parts of it. Strategically, I like to think, operate strategically, and then my own personal, let's say, emotions and things of what I want. And I believe, in general, one should always do things that gives more options. Better to give yourself more options than less options, and you just never know. You never know when you go to a place. You have some preconceived ideas of what you think a thing is going to be. You go and you're like, "Wow, this is fantastic. I want to move to Iowa." I mean, who knows? So I always kept applying, and in fact, I I I sometimes still put my feelers out, just mostly for personal curiosities.
Okay.
And so I continued to apply, and then it was I came in here 2013, 2015, had an interview in the US, had an offer, and I actually accepted the offer
Mhm.
because things were not moving here at a pace that I wanted. And I said, okay, I'm done. I think I'm ready to move back to the US. So I accepted the offer. And then it was Christmas. We were in Kenya. And then I had, again, a change of mind. And the change of mind happened because then I came back from the holidays and I had an offer from here for a permanent position. But I'd already gone through the process of the mind change of going to go. But then again, the question of my interest in African science, do I want to bring up my children? All that came into play. And then I said, okay. So then I actually went back to the people in the US and says, I'm not going to accept it. And then, yeah, then this is what happened here.
Yes. And at this point, at this juncture of your life, actually, we met because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
came
yeah,
for postdoc
right.
at ICTP in 2014, end of
Yeah, it happened.
2014.
It exactly happened then. Right.
Yes, yes. And I know part of these stories
Yeah.
from you. The ICTP is very unique place. Also, as you mentioned, you have these goals of combining research, also focusing on your role on African science or how you help the community
Yes.
there, and also keeping your another foot in the global research
Yeah.
frontier. And ICTP actually provides that platform for you. So
Exactly.
basically, it is a rare event. I agree with Sandro.
No. I think it would not have happened anywhere else.
What is your vision for your role in doing the thing you had imagined you'd be able to do?
Oh, yeah. So here's now strategy of how I of how I've thought about things, which is I I decided then, after the permanency happened, is that I would a bit pull back on the more African science development things and really push my research a lot. And so that's what I did. That's what I'm doing strategically. And I also believe that what is what is missing in kind of ICTP's involvement in Africa is developing high level research. We've done a lot of things in training and education, exposing people to high level research, but we've not trained and taught them how to do high level research. And this is a different story altogether. So at the moment, my strategy has been, I'm really trying to develop my own line more. I involve whenever I can African students and bring them into the ecosystem, but it's more targeted right now on small few individuals. And then of course every 1 to 2 years I'm involved in schools in Africa. But so for now, for me, I want to really develop the research and try to build cases of people who are trained and embedded in strong research ecosystems so that that model can be translated. Now, on the long run, I have a lot of ideas on research and science in Africa, and so there's a part of me that is very interested in how one can do things at a policy level and at a political level. But I love what I do.
Yeah.
The problem is that other aspect takes you further away from being a scientist. So I don't know.
I think in the long run, you will find your scope and also maybe the time. But for now, this is very useful. What you're doing is you're mentoring people, and through ICTP's diploma program, a lot of students from Africa come, and also a lot of people from Africa come to the ICTP because of ICTP organizes a lot of conferences in a lot of areas which are really cutting edge research. So I have seen you interacting with people through all this spectrum, like also people who are coming as an attendee of these conferences.
Yes.
And so you obviously mentoring, and that's also another way to go about taking a step towards it. So let's go back now. Your journey is like you are permanent. As you said, you are focusing on research and you are cracking one after another grant deals. And this is really, really important for ICTP and for your personal journey, and also for, I guess, for people whom you are mentoring to see that how it's getting done. So I would just like to read your awards here. You had ERC Consolidator Grant with Elias Miro from High Energy Physics in ICTP, and you are from CMSP, which is Condensed Matter and Statistical Physics Department. So you are here also combining different departments or sectors or subjects, which is always the forefront of your research. Second is also you had Horizon 2020 European Commission proposal on artificial photosynthesis. Let's go to it a little bit later. And you had ERC Proof of Concepts grant for a project called CUSHOP. I don't know how to say it.
CUSHOP, yes.
CUSHOP, CUSHOP. And it aims to, it's very interesting, I find, that it aims to use AI to design eco-friendly, skin-safe, UV-absorbing molecules for sunscreen.
Right.
Wow. From water, boring water to skincare. People ruling every sector. My question here is, Ali, because you're very successful in writing grants, I would like to get some tips from you, like useful tips that people can implement, and also how to bring about these different fields. And it seems to me, I made a joke when I said this skincare, but it seems to me that you are slowly also growing your interest, but also slightly diverting your research direction. And you are learning new things. So, and you might have been again in an uncomfortable pond. So how these things go hand in hand, tracking the successful grant deals, but also going a little bit broader in research direction.
Okay, so strategies. This is well, it's a loaded answer in the sense. On one side, it goes back to something that we discussed earlier on, which is so at a higher level, it's more one has to be a bit, and this may sound a bit strange, but you have to have an ambition. And it may seem obvious, but and not to say that it is good or bad. If you don't have an ambition, to do something, then you will not take the actions to do it. Okay, whether you're successful or not. So for me, it was always a conscious thinking. I have the ambition that I want to grow. Okay, so now what do I need to do to take those steps? And a part of it is, I'd been working on, for example, the ERC consolidator. I had been working on a project. It wasn't my area of expertise really, but I was looking at optical properties, the UV absorption of hydrogen bond networks in amino acids and proteins. And actually, this just to tell you how the networks and everything connect with each other. 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago, my collaborator now, Gabby Kaminsky from Cambridge, writes to Michele Parrinello because she's read one of his papers on proton transfer. And she says, Michele, we have this very interesting observation where we see this fluorescence in some proteins. We can't understand it. We're looking for an explanation. And we think it's something to do with proton transfer. So Michele immediately responds, it's like, super interesting. And then he's like, he CCs me. He's like, I know the perfect guy you need to talk to. So he basically moved the thing to me. And so then this started a collaboration. And very interesting. We published a bunch of papers, many different experiments, and then I started wondering: is it possible that what we're seeing in proteins and amino acids could translate into water? Because it went back to water. What is the physics and chemistry behind seeing the emission of visible photons in photoexcited water? And that was my initial question, and then I realized that this is actually a very hard problem. And
why would that be interesting? Can you say for our listeners?
So it's basically, this is kind of this process of what happens when you shine UV light on liquid water or ice is at the heart of numerous processes in atmospheric chemistry, in radiolysis involved in the damage to biological materials, where you have high energy photons that kick out electrons and then propagate and trigger a slew of chemical reactions that you don't want to have, create radicals. And so it's a really fundamental process that people have been interested for a long time. And there's been a lot of work. But so anyway, I was motivated by this question. And it was actually during COVID. We were stuck in the house. And I said, okay, again, the strategic question came up. What do I need to do to be on the grid? What is going to give me stronger negotiating power? What is going to give me more independence to do what I want, to have the resources that I want, without relying on funding and budget from within the institute? So I said, okay, well, let's try. And I spent a long time writing this thing. I had a lot of support from a grant writing person who was not on the science, but so we worked a lot. And I had a lot of interactions with people who were ERC grantees and people who weren't, people who had reached the interview, people who didn't. I did a lot of data mining. I knew, I don't know, 5 or 6 people who had received them. So I sent them my proposal, got lots of independent, contradictory feedback from everyone. And then, yeah, it was a lot of a serious investment. But in some sense, this is where the strategy on building a field and an area meant I had the track record. I had built ideas already. So there was a feasibility, but then I was showing that I was pushing the boundary. So there's a high risk. And then the networks. I had experimental networks. I had theory networks. So kind of the package was there. And that's important, right? And if you're going to decide to do it, then check, just make the list and check, have you satisfied, besides the nice idea, do you have all the other boundary conditions? And so it looked like I did. So I did it. And then there's the first step, which is the written part. Then you have the interview. So then I had a lot of training on the interview. And then, that worked out. But it could have equally not worked out. Once you make the interview, you also have to be lucky to make it to that 10, 12% of the cut. And you've got to have someone pushing for you as well. I had made up in my mind, okay, I'm doing it because I want to get it. But if I don't, I'm going to recycle this for other things. So that it worked out. Well, during the process of this, it was actually last summer. I was swimming in the sea, and I started getting interested in wanting to understand technology transfer and intellectual property, and this world and how people think about things because of trying to explore connections with industry funding and with industry PhDs. So before trying to do that, I said, well, let me. So there's this thing called ERC proof of concepts, and so we've learned in our over the last 10 years, and from the current ERC, we think we understand better what hydrogen bonded assemblies can absorb UV light. And then I started reading about sunscreens. I said, well, there's a lot of interest in sunscreens and making them more eco-friendly. Well, maybe you could repurpose our stuff because we were interested for emission of visible light as a probe in imaging. But if you can absorb those photons in the UV range and they don't lead to photodegradation, maybe you can repurpose them in an assembly for a cream. So then I started talking to people in sunscreens.
How did that happen?
So I was. This is when I was. One other afternoon, I was swimming with Alessandro Laio.
For listeners, there is more reason to swim in Adriatic Sea.
Yeah, exactly.
You get ideas.
I was swimming with Alessandro Laio, who's a friend and collaborator, and so I was telling him about my idea, and then he said, "This is a brilliant idea," and then he's like, "Well, why don't you talk to the tech transfer people at SISSA?" He put me in contact with them. We had a Zoom call, and they have connections with the sunscreen industry here in Trieste. I mean, it's an international thing, but okay, so that didn't work out. But then that got me connected with another company that does interested in skin aging, skin cosmetics, whatever stuff I don't know about. But I was told everyone is interested in looking younger these days. Okay. And apparently it's a huge industry. So that was the starting point. But then, it was not like a standard proposal where you can just talk about research. It's about tech transfer. It's about societal commercialization. So I had to learn a lot about all this other business. And so that's what I did. And so this is the Scushop. And so now the goal is, can we use the hope is we want to use these large language models to come up with design rules that can help create another assembly which may have better properties than the ones that we think. Because this is AI seems to be doing this. Like there was an article today in BBC about AI being used to create better antibiotics for some diseases. Okay, and it's doing it. So now for me, it's an excuse because I want to put my hands in large language models.
Okay.
So if it works out, if the sunscreen works out, yes, great. If not, no loss.
Yeah. But it seems really fantastic and interesting that you are bringing all these different fields together and still asking interesting questions in research. Because we talked about using AI for research, I would like to ask you, what is your vision for how the scientific community is going to integrate the AI tools, and how in keeping the standard the same as before when we are training new people? I guess my question is, like, the people who are starting out today, they have a lot of access to these AI tools. You hustle at the computer lab to learn new codes.
Yeah.
And it's now for them, it's like at fingertip. They do not have to learn new techniques as such, but it has some implication in research in the long run, perhaps. So how do you find this playing out in the long run?
I tend to be a bit quite liberal and non-conservative and maybe a bit radical by it, which is essentially I think the skill that I was developing in the lab is useless now. It's not relevant. It's like the skill of using the calculator or the abacus. Your skills change over time, and we have to adapt to the new tools that enable us to be more creative. And the question is, how do you ensure people are still going to be critical, and how do you ensure that people are going to be creative? And I think that's up to the end user to decide whether they want to be creative and critical or not. Like in everything else. I mean, we used to teach numerical methods right together.
Yeah.
It took me a bit of time, but now it's from the get go. So open up the chat GPT, debug your code there, use it, make sure you understand it. Make
Yes,
sure,
exactly.
writing your paper. Yeah, I think go ahead and use it. And
As a
actually,
first draft, perhaps. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a great way to democratize science. And also, I think skills in English should not be a rate determining step for determining whether you get your thing published or not in a journal.
Yep.
So
I agree.
there's a way to get your English to be on a decent enough level that it doesn't become a factor, then great. So I think that we should continue to embrace these tools. And I think it is, I mean, if I look back, I remember running ab initio simulations in Michele's group. This was just 12, 13 years ago on the big Swiss supercomputing cluster. So, where we have infinite resources, and we were happy with 20 to 50 picoseconds. And now
Yep.
my younger collaborators are running a microsecond of deep neural network simulations. And so
Yeah.
fantastic, right? I mean, I think it's quite revolutionary for our field.
Yeah, I like that perspective of integrating it in the research with keeping an eye that the creativity is not getting diminished, but it's also actually giving a platform to explore more
Yeah.
and with the time that it's saving, basically.
Yes.
Thank you, Ali. We covered a lot today, but before I let you go, I would like to ask some fun questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so these fun questions, I would like to know what are your hobbies? I know something that everybody knows at ICTP, that you run marathon and you practice for that. How many marathons did you run?
4.
Wow, it's incredible. So, what are your hobbies?
So what I can say is what were my hobbies. So I used to run a lot. I used to hike a lot. I used to read a lot more. I think in the last 5 years, a lot has changed in the balance of my hobbies and non-hobbies. I think, if I'm completely honest, my big hobby now is, so when I'm not working, which I love to do, it's basically being with the family. And so I think the big hobby now is working on strategies on how to bring up critical minded and thoughtful teenagers. That's the thing I'm able to handle at the moment. But I mean, so I love to travel. And this is one of I love to travel with the family. I like to take them to different places. I now actually I've become, since COVID, I like to cook.
This is the frontier that I didn't know about.
Exactly. So I didn't say I'm good. So it's a frontier, but I'm not sure it's a frontier of goodness. But that's it. I enjoy it, and it's my way of. I find that when I'm cooking, I'm focused on a task that is not going to take me to my computer.
I see. That's interesting. I think also this you share with Sando Scandalo also, who was here in the podcast before. You mentioned about books. What are some of the favorite books that stayed with you apart from science?
There are probably 2 of them. One is Animal Farm by George Orwell. That's like I read it as a child, which I found it's always stayed with me in different ways. And then there's this Hermann Hesse's book, Siddhartha. Siddhartha is one of those, let's say, easy books about life and discovery and your path and how you find your path.
Thanks. Maybe our listeners also can check those out. How many languages do you speak?
The question is, how many languages did I used to speak? So, because a lot has changed also. So, I used to speak very well English, Swahili, Arabic, and Gujarati. Used to. Now, frankly, it's just English. So, Arabic, Gujarati, Swahili have all become, they've blurred out. They're in the brain, but I don't really use them anymore. And Italian is, I really cannot say I speak it because
Così.
it's there. But what's interesting is when I try to speak Swahili, my second language, that's when Italian starts to come in my mouth. There's something about the wiring of the brain in my first and second language is when I'm in Tanzania or Kenya and I try to say Swahili words, that is when Italian comes. But otherwise, Italian never comes to my mouth naturally.
Maybe the linguists will research on this.
And there's something in the neural networks that's
Impactful role models that you want to mention?
I would certainly say parents, both sets of parents, different teachers, advisors, mentors, formally or informally along the way. Lots of colleagues who, as I was a young scientist, who enabled me and involved me in, who kind of trusted potential and allowed me to grow. So, yeah, I think those are the ones, there are many, but it's a community, a combination of different communities all over the world, essentially.
One last question, Ali. What is the biggest or most challenging period of your life where you had to really think and you had to put a lot of effort on decision making? And it's related, the second part of the question, if you go back to that phase of your life now, what would you advise to your younger self?
So I think the biggest one was between PhD and postdoc, when there was this critical thing about getting a permanent job, how to deal with the family boundary conditions, how is that going to work? And that was extremely, I think that's when I started to lose my hair. And my first white hairs started. It never happened before that. What I think I brought too much of it home, and that had implications on relationships. And so finding strategies to separate and to trying to keep work at work, if as best as you can. In our profession it's very hard to do because you're not working a 9 to 5 job, so it's hard to learn to have those fine boundaries. But I think a mistake that I've made, and now it's really irreversible, is that I blurred out the boundary too much between my work and my personal life. So now I'm stuck in this situation. If I could rewind the clock, I would. It's well, yeah. It's never too late. You can always change.
Yeah, sure, and that gives hope for everybody. And also, thank you for being so open and
Absolutely.
diving so deep into all the strategies and giving lots of tips. And I hope our listeners are going back with pages full of notes to implement, to
Yeah.
work on different skills, also different mindsets, and also on the strategies. And thank you for giving us this overarching idea or view on a career path and how to make it a successful one like yours.
Thank you.
You so much, Ali, for your time. I cannot thank you enough.
Thanks for having me. So I appreciate it.
That was my conversation with Professor Ali Hassanali. From growing up in Africa to navigating cultural and academic transitions across continents, Ali has consistently followed the questions that mattered to him the most. His journey reminds us that a successful career need not be linear. It can be built through an unwavering commitment to curiosity and exploration. In this episode, he shared how water, a molecule that we often take for granted, still holds the biggest scientific mysteries, and how his work continues to uncover the hidden complexities of the related problems. We also heard his insights into postdoctoral strategies, network building, and finding permanent academic positions, which are invaluable for early career scientists. He also spoke about his vision for African science, the promising role of AI in research, and about mentorship. If his story resonated with you, please share, subscribe, and comment. And as always, all the references mentioned today can be found in the show notes or in the description box below. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.